Hi everyone, my name is Joshua and welcome to Northern Solar. In this video we're going to be looking at how I managed to power my house and my two electric vehicles for an entire year for just 1p per kilowatt hour. So apologies for the slightly clickbaity title on this one, but I will get to all those numbers and we will get down to the facts of how we managed to do that. There's quite a lot to get through, so we'll jump straight into the presentation. So yeah, this slightly clickbaity title on this video, but it really is true how we managed to do that. So let's just push on and show you what we've been working with this year. So this is a summary of all the videos that I've done this year on the channel. If anyone's been watching on the longer term, you'll see each month I do a review of how much money we've managed to save, what it's cost us to run the house and the electric cars with the solar panels and batteries that we have here installed in our house. So this is the solar installation we have at home. We have 4 kilowatts on the front of the house there, another 4 kilowatts on the back of the house, because our house is facing east and west, so we use both sides of the roof to get the most generation we can. We have 8 kilowatts of solar panels in total, connected to a 6 kilowatt SolarEdge inverter, and we have 13 kilowatt hours of Growatt Battery storage. We have 2 electric vehicles in the house. We have the smaller Renault Zoe, which we've had for just over a year now, and then the Volvo C40 Recharge, which we got a few months ago. So now we're able to split our mileage between the two cars rather than doing all the miles in the one. So what everyone's interested in, solar production. This is the graph for the solar production on our house throughout the entire year of 2023. As you can see, early in the year, January, February, March, the production's really quite low. And again, similar in the end of the year, October, November, December, it's really quite low. But during the middle of the year, we get a huge amount of production. So you can see the highest we generated in 1 month was just over 1100, so 1,121 kilowatt hours generated, and that was in June this year. And then the lowest month was December, 82 kilowatt hours. So there's obviously a huge difference between the good time of the year in the summer and the worst time of year down in winter. So total production for the entire year, 6,532 kilowatt hours. So that's an average of 544 kilowatt hours per month, or 18 kilowatt hours per day. But as you can see, it changes massively depending on the seasons. So the next slide shows what I've broken down into how much solar you get per day, what's the sort of outputs we get, and what's the sort of start and end time for those. So this is based on just on our house, so it would differ depending on if you've got solar on your house and whereabouts in the country you are. But you can see, starting in January, the sun rises fairly late, so the solar doesn't kick in until around 8:30, and the sun sets really early, so we're looking at around 3:45 for the ending of the solar generation. So that's just 7 hours and 15 minutes in the whole day. And the peak output during the day, middle of the day, for the sun shining at lunchtime, you're only still getting 2 kilowatts from our system. So we have an 8 kilowatt system connected to a 6 kilowatt inverter. That's kind of standard for like the oversizing of a solar array versus the generating AC power from the inverter. But yeah, we're nowhere near hitting the peak output of the system in the winter months, so down at around 2 kilowatts. And we averaged just 4.2 kilowatt hours per day in January. And as you can see, as you get in towards spring, this stretches out and becomes a lot more positive. So let's say look at April, the sun's up a lot earlier, so you're starting at 6:15 in the morning, sets a lot later, so the generation finishes at 7:30 at night. You've got 3 hours and 15 minutes, and during the middle of the day, you're hitting around 5.5 kilowatts of power. And so in total, we're getting on average 25 kilowatt hours per day from the solar. And then again, the best time of year, moving forward a little bit, sort of May, June, again, longer days, and we're hitting the maximum of the inverter, sometimes around in the middle of the day hitting 6 kilowatts, and then on average 34.7 in May and 37 in June. And then what happens is as we go through the rest of the summer, it's again similar sort of times of sunset and sunrise. We're not quite hitting the same peak of the inverter, and that's generally down to the temperature. When it's really warm, the inverter and the panels don't work as efficiently, so you might have a really long day but you're not hitting those same 6 kilowatt peaks. So somewhere around 5.5 is more expected in those really hot months, but you're still getting a really good average generation per day in the summer. And as you can see, through September, October into the autumn, you start getting shorter days and the power starts to drop off, and the average generation starts to drop off as well. And then back into winter, really short days, really low power, so overall really low kilowatt hours per day. So that's the sort of solar production side of it. Obviously we have home batteries which help store up the energy we have in excess during the day to use in the evenings and overnight, and then in the autumn and winter we're able to charge those home batteries during the night time and power the house during the day. So we charge them up when it's cheap and use the electricity in the house during the day. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail later on. So this graph just kind of shows the distribution of solar hours per month on average. So as you can see, we get a lot more hours of solar in the sunshine as the day is longer. And on our system we've got an east and west system, so we have early generation from the east and then later generation from the west. So even in the winter months we do get quite a lot of time with the solar. It's just very low sun and very low power because of the angle, so we're not generating very much in these hours. So you can see the graph here is much more shallow than the graph of the generation. The generation is much worse in January and February because yes, the sun is up, but it's much further to the south and it's much lower in the sky, so you get a much lower generation overall than you do in the summer. This graph is kind of here to show our generation in the house versus what we consume in the house. So everything we consume in the house for everything electrically, lighting, heating the hot water, powering all the appliances, dishwasher, washing machine, everything that goes on in the house, as well as the consumption of charging the electric vehicles overnight from the grid. So you can see the curve, the green curve is the solar generation, which ramps up through the summer and then back down into the winter. Our consumption, total consumption, is here in blue, and that's relatively standard. Our consumption doesn't fluctuate hugely throughout the year in terms of electricity. We still heat our house in the winter with gas central heating, so our electricity usage is slightly higher because obviously there's other things going on in the winter that you're using more lights and everything. We do have small electric heaters which we use sometimes in the winter as well, so there's more electricity usage in the winter, and obviously we're generally in the house more as well in the winter, so we're using more, so you'd see it does drop down through the summer. And then what you can also notice is they've split the consumption into the grid consumption, and then showing how that is related to the EV charging of the car, which we do overnight on the cheap rate tariff. So as you can see, in the winter months, the charging of the electric car is a huge part of the consumption, but the grid consumption here, this between the red line and the purple line, is how much we've put into the home battery for the house during the winter. And then as you can see, as you come into the spring and the summer, the only grid consumption we're really using is to charge the car. There's no difference between our grid consumption and EV charging here, so it's all the grid consumption is the car, and the solar is powering all of this extra consumption for the house. And then as you see, as it comes into autumn, that starts to differ again, and we're using more electricity from the grid for the house, which is charging the home battery overnight using our off-peak tariff, and then using that energy during the day. So as you can see, through the winter, there's that difference between the EV charging and the rest of the grid. So there's the house is using that amount of power during that time of year. So as you can see, yes, sometime in the spring, around April, end of April, May time, is when we're able to generate more from our solar than we consume. And that continues all the way through the year till sort of October, when eventually we're not generating enough to cover our needs, so we're having to use the grid a lot more. And also, obviously, we generate a lot more than we need for a lot of the year. So you can see here, our grid export is the green. So this is anything that we don't use in the house that isn't going into the battery. If the battery is full, then it exports out to the grid. And even sometimes during the winter months, that happens a little bit, very low numbers of exporting during the winter months. But as you can see, throughout the summer, we're exporting a huge amount of power back to the grid. A total grid export of 3,675 kilowatt hours for the year, and our grid import of 4,839. As you can see, the grid import is much higher during the winter months, where we're piling electricity into the battery every night, 10 to 13 kilowatt hours every night into the battery, so that we can power the rest of the house all through the day on that battery power. And again, a lot of this sort of base load of the grid import is based on using the car more than the house uses from the grid. So breaking these numbers down, you can see the total generation I mentioned earlier, 6,532 kilowatt hours. We exported 3,675 of those back to the grid, which means that we were able to directly consume 2,857 of those in the house. So that's directly consuming the solar as it's generated or charging it into the home battery. So you can see it's about 56% export and about 44% consumption. And then our total grid consumption of that figure that we had on the previous slide, the total consumption, this total grid consumption is how much we've imported from the grid, both on peak and off peak. So obviously our peak usage is very low. We don't really use very much from the grid because the solar and the batteries are covering almost all that usage. Occasionally during the day, if we've got too many appliances on that the solar and the battery can't power, which is pretty rare, but occasionally we might need to charge the battery on the electric cars outside of the off-peak hours if we need to put a little bit extra if we're going on a long journey, or if we just not managed to charge it overnight and we want to top it up. So yeah, throughout the entire year, just 157 kilowatt hours from the grid during peak times, and the off-peak consumption of 4,782. And this is what really drives the sort of savings and the sort of low cost per kilowatt hour that we've managed to achieve, is that almost all of our grid usage is at the lower rate on our tariff. And I'll go into the tariff details in a bit more in a couple of slides. So as you can see here, 97% of our usage is off-peak and only 3% comes from the grid during peak times. So as you can see here, when we're looking at how much the house or the car uses from the grid, of that grid usage, 3,905 kilowatt hours of that is for the car. So it's 80% of our grid usage is actually charging the car. And all of that happens in the overnight period when we've got the cheap electricity. The house, for the entire year, 1,034. So that house use from the grid is when we're charging the home battery through the winter months, putting the grid energy into the battery when it's cheap, and then using it in the house the next day instead of having to use it from the grid at that point. So as you can see, the house uses very little really in comparison. Only 20% of our grid usage comes for the house, and actually most of it is for charging the cars. And then yeah, this sort of breaks down a little bit more in terms of our total consumption, so not just the grid consumption, the total consumption in the property, just short of 8,000 kilowatt hours, 7,796 kilowatt hours. And of that, 3,905 went into the car, 3,891 for the house. So you can see the solar and the battery are powering most of that, and then the grid powers a little bit of that for the house. So here we go, breaking it down more into the financials. This is kind of what everybody wants to know. Obviously the title of the video was quite clickbaity in terms of 1p per kilowatt hour for the entire year, and this kind of breaks it down as to how we work this out. So these are the costs per month for the electricity we've used in the house. We have a standing charge which we can't avoid even with solar. So that's totals up to £196.36 for the entire year. The cost of our grid usage of the electricity was £548.88. We were able to, you net that together with the standing charge, a total cost of £747.17. But our export earnings, so every time we export anything to the grid, we got paid for it on our rate from our supplier, and we have a export guarantee, smart export guarantee tariff, which gives us money for every kilowatt hour we export. And that changes throughout the year. We've moved tariffs around a little bit. Sometimes we've been on a flat rate where it's maybe 7 or 8p per kilowatt hour out to the grid. And then during the summer we have this, there's a different tariff called Octopus Flux, which gives you different rates depending on when you're exporting to the grid. So being able to program the system to make the most of that meant that throughout the year we were able to earn £573.59 from that export. And then just this winter we've been able to take advantage of the saving sessions that have been happening on the grid, where we export to the grid during these peak times on certain days, and they pay you a really good rate to do that. And we've been able to add another £66.09 of income from those sessions. All of which means if you add in what we've earned versus what it costs, our total cost for the year was £107.49 for all of our electricity costs from the grid. And if you then look at how much we've consumed in the property, our total consumption, 7,796 8.5 kilowatt hours in the entire year, which if you divide the price by the amount we used comes out at 1.4 pence per kilowatt hour. So yeah, 1p per kilowatt hour if you're rounding it down, which makes the title look a lot more appealing. But yeah, 1.4 pence per kilowatt hour for just short of 8,000 kilowatt hours of usage in the property. Kind of wraps it up nicely. And as you can see, most of the cost of the grid here is when it's laid out, you've got cost per kilowatt hour throughout the year. For most of the year, from sort of June all the way through to nearly into November, the cost is negative. And you can see this, we've got June, July, August, September, we've got negative cost, and quite a significantly negative cost per month. And then when we do have a positive cost, net cost of electricity from the grid, they are generally a bit lower. So we've got a couple of pounds here, not too much. It's you can see the amount that we are able to save in the summer balances out what it costs us in the winter quite nicely, and it comes out at 1.4 pence per kilowatt hour. So as I mentioned, we have Octopus as our energy supplier. The tariff we currently on is Octopus Go, which gives us a 60p a day standing rate, which I won't go into, but yeah, it's extremely frustrating to have to pay 60p a day for essentially, no matter what we're using, if we're using nothing or if we're using a lot, it's 60p a day standing rate. And our daily rates per kilowatt hour change depending on what time of day we're using. So we have an off-peak period of from midnight till 4 a.m. of 9 pence per kilowatt hour, and then the rest of the day from 4 a.m. all the way back through to midnight is 31.41 pence per kilowatt hour. And our export rate on the tariff we're currently on is 8 pence per kilowatt hour on a flat rate. So any time of day we're exporting, it's 8 pence per kilowatt hour. There are other tariffs out there. There's another good one called Octopus Intelligent. We can't get on that tariff yet because the equipment we have isn't quite compatible with it, but it's another really good one. It's a similar sort of rates for charging and using from the grid, but you get a better export rate and there's a bit more flexibility about when your off-peak periods are, but definitely worth looking into as well. So I mentioned as well we have this Octopus saving sessions. They call it Octoplus saving sessions. So these are the 6 sessions that happen throughout the winter period. This was from December, and there was a couple of them in late November, but these are the details from December. So we had 6 sessions, and you can see what we were able to save in each one. So the kilowatt hours that we exported to the grid from the battery in each of these sessions, and you get Octo points for doing that, and then there you can be redeemed £4 in your Octopus credit. So yeah, December was £43.46 for those 6 sessions, and there was a couple of sessions in November, so it topped up to around £66 additional savings for us on the bill. So if anyone's interested, each month I do these videos where I summarise what we've generated and all the sort of things we've been through in this overall summary. But this spreadsheet kind of breaks it down each of the months. There'll be a link to this in the description if anyone's interested, but you can see the generation and how much we've exported, how much we've used from the grid, how much we've used in the house, all the percentages and all of the costs and everything broken down month to month, and to show you how it differs obviously through the winter, spring, into summer and autumn as well. And I also try and track the savings each month, not just the cost to the grid, but I try and calculate what the energy would have cost us if we didn't have the solar and battery systems, and calculate a savings amount. It's obviously an estimate, but it's hard to know exactly what it would have cost if we didn't have the solar. But as you can see, it might be a bit small on the screen, but if you add up all the savings that I made throughout the year, we're estimating a savings of £1,929.38 for the year, which is pretty spectacular. I think it's hard to know exactly. It's all based on a set of assumptions around what we would have used and when and what it would have cost and what tariff we would have used for things like that. But overall, somewhere around £2,000 per year being saved, because we use quite a lot of electricity obviously for the cars and for the house. So our bill would be very high, like higher than average. So I think it's fairly reasonable to assume it's somewhere around that figure. So at the end of my videos, if anyone's been watching the channel for any length of time, you'll realise that I do like to do a little plug for Octopus. I don't work for Octopus, but they do offer a £50 referral credit for anyone that signs up. If you are looking to switch energy supply, if you're looking for a better tariff, if you're looking at any sort of renewable tariffs for solar, batteries, EV charging, all of that, or even if you're just looking at switching for a better rate on fixed term deals for gas or electricity, Octopus is a great place to have a look. If you use the link in the description, you'll get £50 credit on your bill, and we'll also get £50 credit on our bill. And yeah, just if anyone has used the code, thank you very much for doing so. It really does help cover the bills through the winter period, especially if people do use this code. So thanks very much to those who already have, and if you are considering, please consider using the code. So that's kind of it really. It's been a really good year in terms of savings for us. It's looking like hopefully a better start to the year now in January, getting through some of the worst months in terms of solar. It's sometimes a bit depressing. I make these videos each month, and in the summer it always looks fantastic. We're making money. The grid are paying us essentially to be up to each month, and sometimes close to £100 a month. Just it seems fantastic when you've got solar panels doing that. It's much tougher throughout the winter when you have to charge the battery overnight and you're paying for that, and you're just trying to make as much savings as you can. But it does show, like, as I like to say in my monthly videos, like, are solar panels worth it? And you can see for us, most definitely yes. It really does depend on your usage, what you're doing in the house, how much electricity you're using. If you're only using a little bit of electricity, and maybe your electricity bill for the year is £600 or £700, it's going to be difficult to save a lot of money. It costs thousands of pounds to install solar and batteries. So if you've then got an outlay of say £10,000 and it might save you £500 a year, it's not going to really look like a good financial investment. It's taking a heck of a long time to pay for itself. Whereas if you're using a lot of electricity for your house, if you've got electric heating, if you've got electric hot water, if you've just got a house full of people that use a lot of electricity, a lot of washing machine, dishwasher, all that sort of stuff, a lot of computers, everything. If you've got high usage and you've got a house that's suitable for solar panel installation, it can really make a huge difference. It does depend again on what tariffs you're using. If you're using the right tariffs for your export to get paid for what you're not using at the time, if you're using the tariffs properly for off-peak charging of the batteries, especially during the winter months where you can make the most of the cheap rate electricity overnight. And again, it totally depends on what type of system you're looking to install. It really does depend on your usage patterns and your consumption in general. But for us, the way we've set things up and the usage that we have, it makes a lot of sense. It's saving us money every year, and maybe within sort of 7 to 8 years it'll have paid for itself, and then we've got another 15 or so years of solar generation from the panels before they sort of get towards the end of their useful life of really, really low electricity bills. It helps us be a bit shielded from any major price changes in the market. As we've seen over the last few years, prices have gone up considerably. They probably will come down again, but at the moment what we like to see is that we're using very little from the grid to power the house. So and if we are using anything from the grid, it's during that off-peak time when it's generally going to be cheaper. So the solar and the batteries help reduce that risk of like huge price changes from the grid. And again, there's obviously the green aspect of it as well. We're generating our own electricity on site, and we're helping the grid by generating and exporting to the grid. So we're helping alleviate the need for fossil fuel usage. Obviously we drive electric cars, they're not suitable for everybody. We really like using them. We don't find it too inconvenient with the charging and everything like that, but we've made the decision to choose electric cars. They work for us. They don't work for everybody. If you can't charge it at home, it's going to cost a lot of money on public charging networks. If you're doing a lot of miles every day, even if you have a home charger, you might not be able to charge it as quick as you want to be able to get it full the next day. But there's a lot of positives out there. It's worth considering if you can get hold of an electric car through a salary sacrifice scheme at work. There's lots of money, sort of tax benefits of that. And if you can charge for free at work, like I get to do quite a lot of my charging at free for work, so my mileage is relatively cheap. There's a lot of options out there for that. So if you've got any comments on the video, if you've got any suggestions of things that I might have missed or got wrong, please drop them in the comments below. If you watch any of my other videos, you usually find there's quite a lot of comments and questions in there, and I love answering them and getting to know how other people's systems are used. Getting advice from people as well, how other people use their systems to help save money, and how best to look at future changes to the house, whether we maybe look at electrifying our heating in the future and how we'll be able to power that, potentially upgrading certain things over the years if needed be, and all those sort of things to help us save money, help the grid and help the planet a little bit as well. Well, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next month for the January review. And as ever, thank you. See you next time.